So you have little bios in your conference folder. I'm not going to excruciatingly introduce these incredibly eminent, wonderful public thinkers in front of you, but I am going to ask them to introduce their organizations so you know the context in which they're working. And maybe, Chine, we'll start with you. What is Theos and what is it trying to do?
Liz, can you tell me that? Hello. Yes, so I'm director of Theos, which is a religion and society think tank based in Westminster in London. And the way that I explain Theos is in kind of, I'd say, 3 different stages. We started in 2006, so we're coming up to our 20th anniversary. And the context in which Theos was started was one in which Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris and the friends were talking about the fact that religion should have no place in public life, that it should be privatized, and that there wasn't going to be no religion in the future anyway. So Theos was started to provide a credible voice for Christianity within public life, within the public square. And the way that we do that is through research, media commentary, events. So that was kind of the beginning of Theos's life. Then Liz joined as director, and I would say this kind of second phase over the past kind of 10, 15 years was really about thinking about how, if you're going to engage in public life, who are you engaging with? It wasn't necessarily that we should only be engaging with politicians, but also artists, poets, journalists, the people that make our common life together. And in doing that, kind of speaking across political difference. And now, I'd say that we are asking ourselves, what is our role now in this current political moment? And we're thinking about how we present or articulate a compelling vision for human flourishing within society and what that looks like. So that is us, Theos.
Thank you so much. Anne.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anne Snyder. I'm the editor of Comment magazine, which there were copies over there. Please take one, hot off the press. The summer issue hit subscribers' mailboxes yesterday, so you are in good company. Comment, I would say, to put it very pithily, exists to translate everything I'm experiencing at this conference today to the broader world. And I mean that most sincerely. Luke has been such a muse and important figure in my own thinking and intellectual formation. I sit between the academy and the street. And I would say I inherited this journal, had been around 20 years. And in the last 5-6 years of my editorship, I guess I would just say our job is a big one, but in some ways simple, but it feels increasingly rare, which is to try to stir an intellectually robust yet accessible, hopeful imagination, specifically around rehumanizing the age with AI towards how that can happen through our existing institutions as well as future institutions. So it's fundamentally a constructive imagination given light and warmth by what we call 2,000 years of Christian social thought. And more recently, in large part due to Luke's influence and others of you who are here, I have sort of planted a flag with Comment of saying we'd like to be a leading vehicle, translating the canon, the global canon of Christian humanism in dialogue with other humanisms and other intellectual traditions for the prevailing pain points of our societal moment.
Thank you so much. Michael.
Yeah. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. Michael Ware, we're 3 years in, I founded an organization called the Center for Christianity in Public Life, and we have the mission to contend for the credibility of Christian resources in public life for the public good. And so we do that through essentially 2 streams of work that we think are essentially related to one another, and we'll probably talk about that quite a bit over this panel, but that's the work of formation, so forming people in light of Christian resources, and then public imagination work, so how are those resources offered to the public for the public good, and so really, really happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to do something really mean. I have given these guys 30, maybe 3 minutes notice. I thought we could workshop this a bit for you, Luke. So I have asked these deeply scholarly influenced, but mainly public communicators to come up with their shortest form definition of their understanding of Christian humanism. You can write them down, you can play with them. It's the beginning of a branding exercise. Who feels confident going first?
I'll go first. Christian humanism is a theological framework to talk about our common humanity, not in the sense of idealizing or elevating the human because we are human, but through the lens of the incarnation of Jesus Christ and what that therefore means for us and our life together.
Woohoo! Thanks. Sounds great.
Can we just co-sign?
Ibid, period.
Go on, have one go.
I think it's that excavation of what it means that human beings were made in the image of God, and that in Jesus Christ we have, I love the phrase that Jennifer shared, sort of the paradigm of the ideal person and what that means for society.
Thank you. You can dodge if you need.
It was so beautiful what she said. I would just simply say Christian humanism is a tradition that looks to Jesus Christ ultimately as the ultimate measure of what it means to be human. And there's a lot wrapped up in the personhood there that yields a whole way of life that has implications for structures as cosmic as the whole world and much more intimate.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, and please forgive me. So, those ideas, what role, if any, do they currently play in the work that you're doing in your individual vocations and in your organizational leadership? And I'm going to ask Michael to go first.
Yeah, so I think inherent in reality, right, which Christian humanism is a testament of what is real. If it's not, then we really don't want a part of it. Is the integral relationship between doing and being. And so for our work, we launched 3 years ago with a few sort of core sentiments that are intended to break down, I think, the false binary, the dualistic thinking that permeates our public life, but also affects how people think about their finances, their relationships, their businesses. So, for instance, this idea that the kind of people we are has much to do with the kind of politics we have. Well, that's something worth considering. If politics is just composed of the right arrangement of instruments and the right allocation of power, then we really don't need to think about the kind of people we are. But if it's more than that, if actually you can't detach the character of the thing from the thing itself, then we really do need to be attentive to that. We talk about how both the beauty and the weakness of our democracy is that it can't quite get around the kind of people we are. How much of our politics, how much of our political effort, how much of our public life is spent trying to get around the kind of people we are to attain certain goods. And then finally, this idea, and of course these are all related, that the state of our politics is a reflection of the state of our souls. So much of our politics and public life seeks to, I think, abstract and remove people from a sense of agency over that which they have the most immediate responsibility over, to focus on the things which they have the most remote sense of responsibility over. This leads to a great sense of cynicism, detachment, and then ultimately a sort of spirit of oppositionalism and antagonism in our public life. And so I find all of these things to be deeply resourced by this idea that the Christian faith at its heart is not about a series of right answers. That is not what the Christian faith offers at its heart. At the center of the Christian faith is not a series of right answers, but a person. And that means at the core of reality is not a series of right answers, but a person. So what does that mean for all of life? We have a particular attention to the civic and political. We think that that kind of dualistic thinking is especially prominent in our politics. And we think our public life is suffering from a lack of Christian resources. But I'd also say, that dualistic thinking, that separation of, as we've already talked about today, sort of faith and reason, what I refer to, drawing on the work of Willard, of moral knowledge from what can be publicly available knowledge. That kind of binary thinking also makes discipleship and Christian formation impossible at the personal level. So it really goes back to both a personal and a public crisis that we're trying to attend to.
Thank you so much. Who would like to go next?
I'll try. I would say, like, running a magazine, which we've kind of bloomed into other mediums, podcasts, events. It's all dialogical. But we are fundamentally dealing with words and images. And I think part of what the Christian humanist tradition has given us, as I sort of stumbled into it a number of years ago, and I can tell that story later if it comes up, but feeling like we were in some time between times and some era shift. And I think we can have a debate about when this era began, et cetera, but noticing that there were friendships, intellectual friendships that have emerged at different points in history when there has been a feeling of plate tectonics clashing, shifting to an unknown future, and this Christian humanist tradition has rearisen, and there's always, there's a couple things going on. There is a holistic intertwining kind of conversation between an aesthetic project, a theological project, a civic and sort of political economy project, and sort of institution building project and virtue formation. And I think when it comes to trying to weave all those together through words on a page, different arguments, commissioning different authors, there is a desire to begin with this humble, almost confessional tone. So it's very tonal. This notion, if you're putting Christ as sort of the model, there is this like inherent wounding in that, but there's also this exultant wonder in that, this transcendent being becoming like us. And somehow that just has to shift anything I edit into being like very invitational in tone, and wrestling with like the ugly, tragic side of life, but not in a way that gives up on hope. So that feels like very concrete to me in the day-to-day just craft of the thing. I would also say in our own theory of change at Comment, we understand learning and the search for truth to come relationally. So it's a little cheesy, but one thing we've built in over the last number of years is just a little bookmark in every issue that comes complete with a meal from a certain part of the world, a recipe, a Spotify playlist in touch with a theme, and certain discussion prompts. So we encourage people to gather around tables of 6 to 8. And it's meant to be a bit meta, but tonally, the way you open up an artistic print artifact and then come to a table, like the centrality almost Eucharistically of the table as a way to probe, are we really in decline? What does that mean? Who is the we? Notions of friendship. I'm trying to think of all of our issue themes. This one, what does discernment really mean in an age of kind of mob mentalities, et cetera? How we can, so much of the academy, and frankly, I live in DC, a world full of pundits, it's all diagnostic and it's very top down and it rarely receives feedback in a way that's meaningful and allows for a cracking open of a new revelation. And what I'm trying to almost create like a cathedral or a container around the conviviality of tables to allow for that, again, that sort of humble listening posture and encounter exchange between strangers turned friends to occur as actually part of the whole pedagogical theory of cultural renewal. And that feels like deeply baked in a distinctively Christian humanist set of convictions.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you. I have today in particular felt a sense of a profound, okay, I get it. I kind of get Christian humanism, and I get why we are having this discussion today. And I'll explain why. So I talked about Theos's early days being very much what was needed at that time, which was, in effect, PR for religion, like we're great, please let us be at the table. And I think the current moment that we are in the UK, is one in which we do actually have a seat at the table as Christians, or Christianity, Judeo-Christian values, whatever we want to badge it as, does have a seat at the table. So people are listening or ready to listen. So I feel in terms of our work at Theos, it has moved from PR for religion to what are you saying then? What is it about? And how does it help us as society deal with some of the existential problems that we are facing? And it really feels like we are in this time of existential change, threat. There are very anti-human forces kind of pressing down on us as nations, societies, but also individuals within that. So I think Christian humanism, there's an opportunity for us to kind of really unpack what it is to be human in light of the person of Jesus Christ and the kind of centuries of tradition that we can offer into this moment. So I love how Michael talks about kind of the Christian resources and what we can do, and the symbols and the pictures and the things that we can paint and offer to this world to help in this moment. I think alongside that, I've got my Theos hat, and then I've got these other hats that I wear. I write and think a lot about racial justice and gender, and kind of from a theological perspective. And I feel like today has been an aha moment for me, in that for me those things felt kind of outside my Theos work, really. That we were kind of intellectuals talking about kind of the economy, politics, secularization, AI. But actually what Christian humanism and in the Black Atlantic has made me realize today even that those things are not side issues. Kind of what it is to be human, the kind of tearing down of racial hierarchies, our common humanity, is actually fundamental and integral to our ideas about human flourishing. So it is, I kind of came in thinking, I don't know how to answer this question, but actually, in the things that we've been unpacking over the past few hours, I've kind of been more certain of how I can take this forward with our work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think Jennifer helpfully put your finger on what it feels like. There's a kind of inquiry happening over this conference, right? About longing for wisdom, longing for some better, more liberatory, more humanizing ideas that we can offer into an anti-human moment. And kind of whatever Christian humanism is it this? And is that the right label for it? And kind of is there something here that we can gather around or not? And maybe you guys could reflect on kind of, you've said a little bit about what the potential might be for your work, but maybe kind of where you think you see potential for it, both for your work and potentially for an emerging community, and where might be the kind of pitfalls or challenges or risks with trying to make a concept like that really central. I mean, I can probably name one, which is this legibility problem of how long it takes to explain what we mean. And that's just the journalist in me that's like, I need to glow up. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think for me it also throws up this, if Christian humanism is really about our common humanity in the person of Jesus Christ, then that also presents us with some questions about the idealization of intellect and learnedness. And there's a quote yesterday about kind of humanism is about reading, or humanism is about books, or whatever it was. The reason why it feels ineligible or illegible or intangible is because it's quite intellectually framed. It's a kind of, so how do we translate that and all the kind of good things we've heard into a magazine format or into a podcast or into media commentary? And I kind of, when you've got a few seconds to explain, how do you make someone realize and feel that kind of aha moment that we've had? Thank you.
I'll just piggyback on that. I have been learning, as I said, we last fall, Comet sort of planted its flag publicly and said, we are Christian humanists. And it was a whole institutional conversation about the baggage of the brand. Is there baggage? My argument was like, well, most other terms have way more baggage than this one. But I've been learning the hard way that that's not entirely true. I think there is I'm trying to figure out a strategy. I asked earlier, it felt a little bit like a risky question. I asked who are the Equianas today? And your answer was lovely, but also points at precisely a bit of my frustration right now, which is so many people. I call them like thousands, 1,000 points of light. It's an old kind of H.W. Bush era phrase, but there's so many there are so many embodiers of this wisdom in so many contexts: police departments, mental health wards, at the border, U.S.-Mexico border, within Congress, believe it or not, in our country, which is hard to see, but there are few, and teachers, weavers on the neighborhood block, within higher educational institutions, and they're often falling on their own sword, and they feel very, very alone. And in a previous life, my job was to find these people. I didn't actually have Christian humanism yet as a tradition to lean on, but intuitively, and narrate their lives, narrate their organizational logics. There is no I think why I'm clinging to Christian humanism as a hope, although I think I want it to be in deep dialogue with other humanisms, and I fear sometimes in our current cultural moment, once they hear the word Christian, other humanisms don't want to be, they're like, well, am I included? Am I welcome in the room? And the answer in the tradition is always yes. The whole point of this is that we are interacting with those outside of this particular anthropology. I see it as having the potential to build a common world for, it's the language, it can provide language. And I think, we're just in a mode right now, we're in an era, we're in a transitional time where a lot of the old categories and words, frankly, have to be kind of thrown out or rejiggered. And there's something in Christian humanism I'm finding my way towards that I don't think you can lead with as a brand. It's not attractive enough, it's not understood enough, even if we're hearing it explained today and it feels like natural law or gravity, as someone said earlier. That's not how it leads out there. But I think if you can gather the stories and those who are embodying it in a huge range of contexts, to be with one another, and there has to be an aesthetic component, like 2/3 of the way through a given gathering or life together, then there can be people like some of you in this room to provide that conceptual ferment and categorization and the power of naming what's already being lived. The practice is ahead of the theory right now. And I just think there's something about this that it can't be led, but it could sneak up and actually become the house. Like, you have to gather the people in the wilderness, and then I think something in this language establishment that Christian humanism can offer in its 2,000-year history can weirdly, the words can help provide like a philosophical home for so many homeless people.
Thank you. To add anything?
Yeah, I do think, just a quick note there, I have become less and less skeptical about the viability of the term Christian humanism as potentially publicly salient in light of the very anti-human forces that you spoke to. And so I do wonder if we're in a moment or entering a moment where it's not you talked about Theos being founded in like the Dawkins Harris, that it's not the sort of late 20th century sort of humanism as this troll, as this thing to be, but it will actually touch something that people are feeling very deeply. And so I think even as a banner, I've become more open to it, even with the kind of baggage it has. I think that there are some real threats, and abstraction and extraction, that Christian humanism will be boiled down to an agenda. And I think the moment that happens, you're in a really difficult territory. I once you're in the territory of claiming God hath said when he hasn't spoken. By the way, I was once at Cambridge and referred to Lewis's Meditations on the Third Commandment as a little-known C.S. Lewis essay, and they said, we're Cambridge, there is no such thing as a little-known C.S. Lewis essay. I thought, okay, I'm under advisement. And then I do think that there's a danger of a kind of parochialism and an inability. So sort of my theory of change here is that you need individual, organizational examples of integrity that are doing both the being and the doing. You need an ecosystem of support of people in differentiated but like-minded efforts that are willing to identify and name where this Christian humanistic impulse is showing up outside so that it doesn't become sort of the property of just one expression. And then you need sort of the external actors who are willing to dip in and take and affirm and be modeled as receiving the benefits, the resources of Christian humanism. A parochialism can break that down entirely. So the question is, can we build an ecosystem that understands the broad value of, for instance, Luke being where he is? Or is our Christian humanism so parochial, it's like, well, yeah, but doesn't he like that organizing bit? That's not really my... So I do think that there's a sense of broad solidarity that has to take shape in order for this or a similar kind of movement to take place. And again, differentiated individual and organizational and leader expressions that can be affirmed and identified by a surrounding, generally like-minded ecosystem, and then really thinking about what does it mean to build something that can truly be offered as a resource to the broad public, as opposed to sort of a banner that we're taking in conquest. Like, what does it mean to, and unfortunately, and I'll just speak for the States, when Christians show up in public life, the general public is not saying, oh, this is a group that is seeking my good. This is a group that's gathering out of a spirit of loving service. It's, no, this is a group that's looking to amass enough power to impose their will on me. But what does it look like to show up in a way that is characterized by loving service? And then to offer these moments where that can be received by civic leaders who have no stake in Christianity at all.
Can I just add something? I think that one of the threats also and the dangers of adopting Christian humanism and kind of even the kind of Christian resource into the world is the slight assumption that we provide the answers to this world that is over there. I think increasingly I'm seeing part of our work at Theos is to also shine light on the signs of the kingdom that are in the world itself and wouldn't be badged or named as kind of Christian humanism or Christianity. But pointing people towards those things that they feel it when they see it, this kind of pull towards a common humanity and how things are supposed to be. So one example, at Theos, we've done a report on care work and kind of the undervaluing of care work, and we've done a photography exhibition with portraits of carers and care workers kind of almost kind of as saints. It's currently in Southwark Cathedral. And care work is, whether or not, the carers themselves are perfect people or good people, the act of caring for another person's body who cannot care for themselves is, to me, a kind of symbol of what we're talking about in terms of our common dignity, common humanity, equality. And whereas the world is pulling us, I feel, away from that, so that kind of instinctively most of us would see that as icky, like, oh, like, I wouldn't do that. I'm above that, or I'm an intellectual. But there is something beautiful in that. So how can we shine a light on those things that are already happening out there in the world?
Maybe just real briefly, I think that's like a key point, and I think one of the things that the people in this room can do, I think, Jennifer, you did it today, is help identifying and defining the kinds of logics and instantiations that sort of reflect the Spirit. And I think one of the most sort of potent examples of this to me is actually the issue you did on gift logic. It was such an elegant idea that was done both with theory but also with examples of how it was playing out in the real world. And it's a sort of framework that then you could, as people are out in the world, you can put more and more things into that bucket. Oh, that, like I'm seeing the gift logic in operation. And I think we need like hundreds of those kinds of things. Like, oh, that self-giving, forgiveness, gentleness in the face of aggression, like all of these kinds of things that then as people are going up, because one of the real problems right now is that the resources of the Christian faith, if I could use the phrase, are deemed as ideals that aren't fit for the real world. And so there's a real there's a thought now that like the worst expressions of Christian life right now in public life are due to overconfidence. I think that's completely wrong. I think the harmful expressions of Christianity we're seeing right now are due to deep, profound insecurity about the nature of reality. And so when we could point to real viable examples of the sort of the Christian life being lived out in service of others, that can be a tremendous, tremendous gift.
I do think that you're all pulling on a thread about how does this sound for people who don't accept the premise that Jesus is the kind of the icon of true humanity, and how do you narrate this in a way that says, because I believe that, I will defend your full humanity, like ideally more than my own. Mm-hmm. And I don't need you to believe that in order for me to be committed to your full humanity, whether you're my neighbor because I'm called to love you, whether you are in fact my enemy because I am also called to love you. And that, like, the particularity and the deep-rootedness, I feel like there's always these two risks, right? We drop the particularity of the Christian and we become ashamed of it, and we don't show our cards about where we're rooting this commitment. And the other risk is that we are, it becomes a kind of defensive Christian identity politics, yes. And we refuse to hear how threatening it can sound to people, yes, who have been harmed or perceive some of the harm we've been hearing about over the last couple of days. In a minute, I'm going to come to you for questions. So this is your, if you are an internal processor, this is your warning. I want to ask about a couple of terms that have maybe come up, at least in conversations over coffee. One of them is a kind of a civilizational Christianity, which is another model where people are thinking about what role might Christian ideas play in public life. Christian nationalism, which I'm never quite sure what the difference is, but they're two phrases. And I've had a couple of conversations with people already where I'm like, all of these terms are complex, and there are versions of them that feel frankly outright terrifying, and versions of them that are expressed in ways that make me go, okay, like that actually doesn't sound a million miles from what I mean by the things I'm committed to. So I don't want to kind of like put up two bogeyman puppets in the room, but I do want to kind of explore the edges of those. Let's just start with the hypothesis that they are slightly different from what we mean by Christian humanism. And I'd love you to say kind of, what are you seeing? And maybe if I'm not expressed that at all coherently, kind of what are your concerns or questions about the kind of rising popularity of some of those frameworks and phrases?
So I can talk from a UK perspective. I think, so in some ways, Christian nationalism, or kind of talk of Judeo-Christian values that we've seen spring up probably in the past couple of years at a prominent level, so people like Nigel Farage talking about the importance of Judeo-Christian values, although he is not himself a Christian. In some ways, if I look at it simplistically, that is doing the work that Theos should be happy about, right? That actually people are drawing on Christianity or Christian values as something that they would like to celebrate when it comes to kind of politics or how we do life together. But there's an instinct in me that's like, oh, but not like that. It's not that we're talking about. It actually was never about just Christianity being good for society in general. It was actually about Jesus, and it was actually about a transformation of the individual, not in isolation, in community with others who are like you and who are different from you. So kind of feeling like, oh, suddenly we have to kind of try and communicate that into this this kind of new rhetoric that we're seeing. The big problem that I see, though, with it is, and I feel like people should just say this, what I see is white supremacy in these conversations, and it's often coded as Judeo-Christian values or Western values, but what often the people who are saying it really mean, they're probably talking about anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-Muslim sentiment, or the people not like us who are, trying to change our values and way of being. And that to me has nothing to do with this Jesus to me, or what we've heard about in terms of kind of what Christian humanism provides us with. And often the people, both the Christians and not, who are talking about Judeo-Christian values, they are not talking about Jesus, they're talking about something else. So that is a big danger and a threat to us. If we don't communicate something different, but not in a necessarily kind of combative way, like, oh, not those guys like I just did, but how can we also model something different? I think instinctively, though, people who are not Christian might be able to tell the difference. This happened yesterday. Some of my non-Christian friends on a WhatsApp group had posted, is it Sean, what's his face? The Sean Fuchs? Yeah. In America, hosting a kind of prayer session for the spat between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, right? And they posted it and they said, like, do these guys not get that this is not what their Christianity is about, or that neither Trump or Musk are Christian? I was like, I'm glad that you see that. But people can tell the difference, but we need to also step into that space and model something different.
So I do think generally some of the naming that goes on around Christian nationalism is getting at a real thing. I would highly recommend Tobias Kremer's book, Godless Crusade, on, I think, both. We could talk about that more. We could talk, but here, my concern, I have some substantive concerns with how it's measured, but I'll hold those. Maybe I'll just speak more politically. I am very concerned about creating an environment in which you have one political side that makes these sort of belligerent, confident appeals to Christianity, and another side that sees in that a sort of foil to react off of. Look at those weirdos. Do we really want to live in a country or in a world that's sort of dominated by these religious fanatics, and never has a positive vision to offer? So to go back to my earlier comment, it's actually another reason why I've thought, again, with potential and real imperfections, what I like about Christian humanism is it's a positively framed project. I'm very concerned about where it leaves tens of millions of Americans. I'll just speak to the American context. If they think that their vote is a choice between a belligerent, but at least happy to identify as Christian, and then a side that has very clear ideas on what Christianity should not be, where it should not show up, what Christians should not do, but doesn't have any positive vision for, here's how you could take part in a pluralistic, diverse democracy. Just one word on Christian nationalism. I do think that there are expressions of it that get at some real valid critiques of the ways in which liberal proceduralism has been used to, I think, artificially shut down various types of discourse, and I think we need to be honest about that. But I think my central sort of critique of Christian nationalism has been that it sought a special status for Christians, all while avoiding a special responsibility, which is just a complete inversion of what the Christian motivation ought to be in public. And that's something, this sort of religion of affiliation as opposed to transformation, is one that can be rejected not just on civic grounds, not just on liberal grounds, but on the very content of the faith itself.
Thank you. Anyone like to add anything before we go to questions? We have hopefully someone who's happy to run around with a microphone, and we're going to give one of our microphones to the lovely gentleman with the kerchief, I think, who may be around, or someone else. Thank you. We're going to just use one of these mics, I think, was the plan, and we'll share. Thank you. And let's go to this gentleman here, and then this lady next.
Thank you all. That's a really interesting discussion. And I think the whole area of engagement with public life is a hugely important one in my area of bioethics and technology ethics. And I think the question I have for you is, we often talk about how we use the right language to engage with policymakers, politicians, etc. I think we need to remember that there is a kind of longitudinal dynamic here in that how do we do that over a period of time to engender long-term commitment. So my own work involved in policy in the past has brought me into contact with various politicians. Our political world at the moment is so volatile, you don't know where they're going to be in 5 years' time or even 2 years' time. So I guess how do we encourage people who we want to engage with to be committed or to be interested in the stuff that we want them to be interested in, to put it in instrumental terms, for a long period of time? How do we encourage people in public life to be our allies and supporters on an ongoing basis?
I want to take that.
I'll just quickly say I think it's why my strong impulse here is that I think it's the weakness of projects as opposed to institutions. I think this model of short-term reactionary interventions that aren't set up even with the intention of stewarding a conversation over the long term sets up this mode of extraction, this mode of sort of, well, we have a crisis now that has to be solved, but after the crisis, whether it's an election, whether it's a particular issue, it sort of sets up the expectation that the table won't be there anymore. And that this is maybe something we need to get through an era, a particular political era, or a very sort of narrow question. But that's why I think tables have to be set up, new institutions have to be built, current institutions need to be re-enlivened. That's a vital aspect. And then I just refer back to the modeling. So I think I know people who are very good at advising civic leaders and there are private relationships that are held, and there is a sort of don't trumpet your good deeds kind of thing that plays into this, and then also a very practical concern for privacy and but I do think we're entering people need to see the exchange taking place, or they don't have an imagination for it.
Do you mind if I offer a very gentle provocation back? And it was probably just a reaction to the particular word form, but my experience of engaging in public life is when we start with how do we work out how to get people to care what we care about, and how do we get them to do what we want them to do.
I appreciate very instrumental language.
Yeah, and honestly, that's almost all policy engagement, right? That's almost all public engagement. That is the theory of change of almost all engagement. And sometimes there's a wiser serpents thing, and there are strategies and tactics that need to be deployed. But my poorly thought out intuition based on what we've been talking about as a vision of the human, and my experience is that's the wrong way round. And that if we try and adopt a posture like Paul was talking about, of that attentive listening to the humans involved, actually, the particular individual humans seeking to serve the public good in whatever role they're in, and listen for their yearnings, and listen for their pain points, and listen for where they are caught up in dehumanizing systems and feeling dehumanized themselves, and then going, and what do we have to offer that might help you? What do we have to offer that might serve you? Those relationships then become like a fruitful, ongoing place of mutual service, rather than a way of like pulling a lever to get something done. But I've done both, I will confess.
I think that's really helpful, actually, because I think so often I'm involved in all kinds of campaigns. It's very easy to sort of know what your message is and want to get it over, but actually thinking about the reverse communication is so important.
Yeah, and we're going to go to Anne and then pass the microphone next door to you.
I'll just say quickly, I felt a great irony being here the last 24 hours. Believe it or not, I don't go to many conferences, though I sometimes host them, which is a problem, a moral problem. But to myself, I'm in the business of trying to create oases of slow thought, and there is a pace question here. And I myself today have been so nourished, not just by the gravity of, frankly, you all getting paid to read the stuff I don't have time to read, but to get grounded in this global canon around like deep convictions of my heart. I could cry. It's been just so nourishing. I've been at a fire hose from Paul last night. I mean, everything. And I think when I think about specifically legislators or journalists, I often like crisscross between the academy and DC, where I live, which is much more fast-paced, very, very instrumental, agenda-driven, et cetera. I'm so shocked every time I'm in whiplash by the utterly different clocks. And we have a friend, actually all of us on this panel have a friend, I'll just name him here, Sam Kimbrell, and I think there's examples of this in the US and the UK, who has kind of discerned this problem and has created a very hospitable, tender, but like mathematically well-proportioned set of basically salons where there might be one or two congressional legislators, occasionally a member of Congress in our context would be parliamentary here, obviously, with like fast-paced national journalists and then philosophers and occasionally a theologian, and that like cross-cognitive, usually groups of 6 to 10 deep 3 to 4 hour discussions once a month, where that person who's in that fast-paced, instrumental, reactive agenda chlorine, that like does marvels too, and you don't see results right away. But I do wonder if like J.D. Vance, and not that you could get the vice president, but if he were like part of something like that, and he could be humble before it, and it's not just a bunch of Catholic integralists, like. It would be really remarkable to see his spirit in 5 years. So I think there is something, and I think a lot of us actually are in that, trying to do that work, and I found a great irony today, because I think I've been trying to do that in a machine-like pace. And then to be here, I get to be on the receiving end. It's been such a gift.
Thank you. Here, and then could you pass the microphone forward to Denise?
Hi, thank you all so very much. This has been so enriching so far, just hearing your thoughts. My question is concerning language of demonization that we're hearing, at least in the United States. There's a kind of both sides are using demonizing language, and I myself have kind of fallen into this, where it's like you see this person who is maybe like a leader of a country who is dehumanizing others, and in a very intense way, at a very large scale. And I think the gut reaction from a lot of us is to dehumanize that person who is dehumanizing other people, to demonize that person, and in a way make them subhuman. And the things they can be doing very well may be inhumane, but they themselves are human. And at the same time, I realize that as Christians, we are called to have this kind of righteous anger towards people, leaders, people who are doing these things. So I guess my kind of question is, I guess it's easy to say, like, just don't demonize people, but it's something that I struggle with, and like, I don't know, how can we maintain like a peaceful discourse while also being righteously angry when we think we are called to be?
I'll just say quickly, I have a little note card, this little meta like literally meta because of the nature of a mirror, but I have a little note card on my mirror at home that is a simple sentence: can you name the evil today without mirroring it? And that has just become very increasingly difficult emotionally, viscerally to do. But it's like learning how to continually hone, and some of this is through discerning friendships and how one is silent and how one listens vertically and horizontally. But attuning, actually like almost emotional radar, less intellectual radar, to feel defiantly angry before any form of bullying, and then somehow take a breath and figure out how to be in relationship somehow with the dignity of that person. And so anyways, I think this is the challenge of our time, humanly speaking, from an energy perspective.
I think Jesus gave us like incredible life hack in that he told us to pray for our enemies. And there is no quicker way for me to break the boiling resentment in my heart than to pray a blessing over someone who I am full of hatred for. And it is remarkable. And what feels like happens is like a straining of the stock, and what's left is the clarity of the evil that's being done, and what's taken away is my right to judge that heart, because that's not my job. And I really do think it's like sort of sounds mad in some ways that it could be that simple, but my experience is the discipline of praying for my enemies helps me keep hold of my soul. Even as I want to fight.
One of the things I would just kind of add to that is that we can choose to see people in a different way. So, I don't normally do this, but I thought, okay, what if I saw certain leaders of certain countries as just crazy old demented men, like old men, and you kind of start to think, okay, maybe, he's just a human being, just like I am. However, I do feel like there is a place for righteous anger if that person's behavior impacts someone else and dehumanizes them and has a material impact on their livelihood, their well-being, their safety. And I think that, yes, you can pray for people, we can feel more warmly towards them in ourselves, but there is absolutely also the place for anger on behalf of other people, not anger because they're not people like us and we don't like those people.
Thank you. Denise, and then there's 2 questions just here, and then I promise we will go to the back.
I'm sitting here struggling a little bit. And I think of what Michael said about the doing and being, and what we're here sitting in the seat of the thinkers, and it's theological insights and theological inquiry. And I come from an engineering background, and I've sat here and I've heard you espouse all kinds of things about people who've been trained and taught at the institution which I now work at, so Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance and the Hoover Institute, and who I'm not sure are informed in any way by the theological insights that we've been bringing. Where is the place for the thinking and the doing at the intersect of the theology? So how do we impact those who are Palantir, another Stanford-trained scientist who is pulling all the world together and all our data without our permission? Where does the theology of what we're doing and how we view humans, where are the Christians in the academy who will sit together and bring all of our insights together and support those who do research there in ways that will affect what we're doing and how others are allowed to be? The thinking and the doing and the being has to come together somewhere. And your theological insights are wonderful and we need it. But we also need to make that happen at the place where the creative imaginations get to work into the actual artifacts that drive our society today.
Thank you.
And especially for those of us of African descent.
Yeah.
Let's pull it out. We talk about the Black Atlantic, and I open my mouth and you already have a vision of who I am because I am clothed in black skin. And whether we're Christian or not, that happens. And I come from black skin from the Caribbean originally. Those of us who escaped, who chose to escape before you freed us. What happens when we bring that to bear today? And I also sit where I know a lot of the thinkers and doers are open to our input. They respond when we ask them to. They do engage with us. But I'm not sure that we Christian thinkers of the theology in the academy are open to engaging with those who I prefer to pray Psalm 65 over. Take them out, God, versus bless them, God.
Yeah, maybe a bit of both.
I think the thinking and the doing and the being happens, it does happen in other places and other spaces in which there is conversation across a table or over coffee or over lunch or over dinner. And I think many of the people in this room, yes, there is this, which is a theological conference where we're kind of talking and we're thinking, but also a lot of people in this room would also translate that thinking into the conversations that they have with some of these people who are influential in our society over dinner. And I think that the doors are open in many spaces because people are, individually longing for something and needing something, but also societally needing new ideas and new thinking. So I'd say, in AI or in politics or media, the doors are open to us. My fear is, though, that there is a different level of people, some of the people that you just named, who, when they enter into theological spaces, people moderate their language or fear them or revere them because of the power that they hold and the money that they have. I feel like if J.D. Vance was here right now, we would, I don't know, maybe we'd just still be saying the same stuff, but I think that there are spaces in which J.D. Vance enters and then people just don't say what they say about him when he's gone. So I think the formation, and J.D. Vance in a home group or a kind of fellowship group is the place where that thinking and being and doing has to happen, but it's probably not going to be with someone who looks like us. It needs to be those other people who can who can speak into his life and his thinking. But there must be those people.
Yeah, thank you. Do you feel strongly? I'm aware that we have. Could we get Ariana's just on the end here? I don't know your name. Who's sitting next to her? If we have those two, and then Dan at the back in the pink shirt. If we could take all those three together for these guys to respond to, and then hopefully we'll have time for another few.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I like this concept of the practice coming before the theory, kind of meeting a felt need societally, and the role of institutions, which I think you guys have have addressed. But one institution that we have not talked about at all yet this weekend is the church. And what do you see the role of the church playing in this kind of conversation of Christian humanism and bringing this to bear in a practical, contextual way on the ground? Thank you.
Jess.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate how each of you talked about Christian hope and the need to present these ideas in a more positive way, and Christian humanism as a whole doing that. What are some challenges each of you have faced in your own endeavors to do that? Just with cynicism having more of a hold on people. I'm thinking, especially in journalism, just that clickbait headlines get higher views and more revenue. And just as we try to instill this in our own lives, what are some challenges you've faced?
Thank you. And then finally, gentleman in the pink or mauve. a kind of pastel-y
Whatever
mid-color.
it is. First of all, I just want to thank all the panelists. That was really just tremendous and impassioned. My question is pretty simple. As I think about who Jesus Christ is, one of the fundamental ways of relating is through spirituality as both an individual and collective practice. So that seems to me at the heart of the humanizing part of Christian humanism. And so I'd love to hear you all comment on that.
Church cynicism and Christian spirituality. You may take what you wish.
Trying to find an elegant way to synthesize one answer.
You can
for all
just
three.
answer one, and then the others can pick up.
Yeah, that's yeah. This is maybe a way to do it, and it also touches on your question. The fundamental understanding that Christians need to have when it comes to these public questions, and part of where the disconnect is that there is no political you. Like there's just you. It's like the kind of person who lies and deceives their way through a political argument is the kind of person who lies and deceives their way to get to their objective. Theology in America, evangelical theology in particular, but I think it's important not to, there are expressions of this that show up in other places, has developed in such a way that the sort of character of the objective is viewed as, at best, coincidental to the objective itself. And so when you're in the political fray, you can explain away a lot of things just by the motive. This is not disconnected from a theology that suggests that what it means to be a Christian is that you're willing to nod your head yes at a few theological propositions and then go about your day. Like the theology is connected to the politics. The church plays like the fundamental role in a number of ways. One is I think of churches as sort of civic laboratories. Like it's historically, churches are one of the places, one of the formative places in which people learn like basic civic practices. I think more important than that is it's in the church that you can gain a vision of the kingdom of God that encompasses but is not limited to or superseded by a political vision. It's like one of the major, again, this sort of reactionary impulse, one of the reasons why things get politicized so quickly. I hear testimonials from pastors who will say things, and now this is like a trope, but who will say things like, I just read from the lectionary and I got emails accusing me of being political, or I spoke to, I had a pastor who said, I preached on racial justice, and I made sure that I was just speaking from the text, and I still got accused of being political. And what I had to advise this pastor is it possible that the reason why some of your congregants thought you were being political is because you actually were? The theology that you had constructed gave them no right to expect that you would speak to something happening in current events. So, in the wake of George Floyd, for instance, it was a surprise to your congregants that you would have something to say. I'll just very briefly say, the alternative to this is speaking to public issues out of the life of the church. So my church in Arlington, for instance, there was a decision by an administration on DACA, the DACA program, Deferred Action for migrant children. We knew our pastor was going to speak to that, not because it was on A1 of the New York Times, not because he's particularly an activist-minded pastor, but we have a immigration legal aid service at our church. So if you're at all in touch with the life of the church, the family members who were served by that legal aid ministry that are now worried about their status. You know the lawyers in the congregation that after working their day jobs were dedicating time in the legal aid clinic after hours. So in other words, it was just very evident this isn't political. It's theological. This isn't a political community. It's first and foremost an ecclesial community, and that can just be very helpful. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Things you'd like to add?
I'll take the spirituality point. It was interesting when I hear spirituality, often I immediately go towards, okay, you're not talking about religion, you're talking about something else, and I think that's an interesting approach. And I think one of the things that we are seeing in some of the kind of polling, particularly among younger people, is a draw towards the spiritual elements of faith traditions and the spiritual practices. And two things I'll talk about: pilgrimage and kind of monastic traditions. So we've seen a significant rise in the UK in the number of people going on pilgrimages, all globally. I think it was something like 453 people had done the Santiago de Compostela in 1994. Now 500,000 people have done it. And I was interested in noting when Professor Gilroy said yesterday that there are three things that enslaved people did once they were free: changed their name, got married, but also went on a journey, kind of a walk to almost kind of find themselves or refine themselves. I think in this current existential political moment where people are feeling hopeless and lost, they are wanting to go on a journey somewhere to find themselves, but also reconnect with the past and the things that have stood for a long time. So yeah, massive increase there. But also kind of the monastic traditions that are both kind of appeal to the search for the spiritual, the numinous, the kind of the experience, the embodied experience of faith, but also they are within the context of community and tradition and liturgy and words that we say together that holds those people who are kind of currently feeling kind of lost. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we'll take a question here. And that's probably all we have time for, but these guys are around and you can mob them over coffee.
Thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts. I've got perhaps a provocative two-pronged question that I think brings it back to Christian humanism. So I'm just cognizant even in this Q&A that 80% of the voices were across the pond. And there's an adage, of course, that hard cases make bad law. And I think the US context right now is a very hard case. And so I do wonder, reflecting on how much the US context kind of is so hard in some ways that it kind of impacts the way we do this kind of theology. And so perhaps thinking about European, global, Asian, African perspectives could be quite helpful. And then the kind of question into that then is, there was a lot of reaction and pushback against, say, civilization Christianity, Christian nationalism, but clearly those kinds of movements are rooted in authentic existential desires for roots, community, history, nationhood, and Pope Francis talks about how we need to retrieve the concept of being a people, a Christian people. And so given that authentic desire, how would you address and meet those desires rather than merely reacting against associative faith? Because clearly association and transformation are together at the same time. So,
thank you. Maybe I'll say something briefly while you guys process. I didn't dash your mics. It does feel like there is there's always two ditches to fall into, right? And in my understanding of, I guess, just the depth of the gospel, whether you call it kind of Christian humanism or not, is one of the few places that feels able to hold together both the particularity and the universality of the human experience. And I think one of the risks with Christian humanism is it does slide into just universalism, right? And that is in the text. The New Testament was radical in its time for its anti-tribal, universalizing proclamation. it disrupts so many of these prior lines of belonging and organizations of society and says there's something bigger than this. And I always think about Revelation being like every tribe and tongue are still there, right? That we come with our identities, that we gather as our peoples, that we are still part of our stories, that different cultures have different expressions. They don't all have to become the same. Like those instinctive units of belonging and moral formation aren't obliterated. That there is a universality and a particularity, and that almost all the ways we go wrong in our attempts to organize our common life are refusing to acknowledge the both, right? The both and of those two. That's all I'd say. Like, if Christian humanism is going to be any use in the world, it's got to be able to hold both, I think. Maybe we're at an end.
Please.
You should end, because I think it'll be more magisterial. And I'll be honest, I have thrown a quiet, in the closet pity party for myself since January 20th. Living in DC, being based in the US, trying to take a publication in a more global direction, finding it nearly impossible to think in public in a way that can do what I hope always, which is to mischievously surprise people with a fresh framework that might unite them. And I think it is a very hard context right now, and Americans, of course, are so obnoxiously dominate the world and the oxygen. They're like, but it is just a big rock in the world, and the epistemological fractures are so excruciatingly deep right now, and somehow navigating that through language feels impossible. So the only way I know how to get around that is long-suffering relationship. And brave relationship, frankly, even when I feel like violated or there's like spiritual violence going on. And I'm not navigating that perfectly at all, but it's a prayer. I know your phrase association and, how did you put it? Association and transmission? Transformation. Okay, but transformation is also an interesting word in there. I would say I was telling Chine this right before this panel, up until about maybe even 2 months ago, I was one of these very skeptical folks about like all these conversions happening, specifically to Christianity. We published a lovely piece by Luke last year on the conversion of public intellectuals, so like what's going on with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and like these figures. Paul Kingsnorth, you could name, and just sort of seeing it as like a mode of trying to find a potent spiritual sponsor of cultural hegemony. And then, frankly, as a woman discerning a lot of this, it has also felt like a manosphere thing happening, that, especially when you look at conversions to orthodoxy and what's going on, and I think I was irresponsibly, like sort of knee-jerk and not without cause, immediately suspicious. And I think right now, since Easter, I have so many issues. I feel like Christianity is in such a crisis right now, and I don't have a lot of hope in the church. But since Easter, to just learn that there have been more baptisms, in decades, specifically in Orthodoxy in the Catholic world, globally, and I was telling her I've been sort of overhearing in airports and coffee shops, interestingly, specifically men, although I don't think this is only a male trend, asking with one another, like in kind of naked friendship and not with cynicism, like a yearning around existential questions of what it means to be responsible, what it means to be self-sacrificing, and I don't hear political anger in their voices. I do hear some yearning, and they're desiring to belong, and it is sort of like the end of the disenchanted age, and there's rebellion. So I'm trying to, myself as an individual, and I'm wondering as I hear all of us who have been diagnosing Christian nationalism with great worry, and and it's very worth wringing its hands over, and I completely agree with what Chine said, is like ultimately we can boil a lot of it down to white supremacy, at least in our context. I'm trying to, there's a certain like reservoir of patience and that I'm grasping to maintain, to say, could we be actually open to something real happening here that could lead to visible transformation? But I need to see Galatians 5 fruit in these lives, and that can take time. So I'm sort of in this weird conversion in my own setting right now of trying to, in the context, especially across social class and across racial lines, and I'm watching some of these moves. Yeah, and this is where you just have to get into individual storytelling and for a little bit, ignore the Pew Research surveys of trend lines. Pay attention to the Theos ones. But to sort of smell something really beautiful happening here of lives being transformed in a way that could be, sources of seeds broken open for the earth.
Please join me in thanking our amazing panelists.